Box Silent listeners, with us today we've got writer, former amateur boxer, film director, ex-Lothario, shall we say as well. He's been on the show before, Brin-Jonathan Butler. Good to have you back again, mate. Obviously you've been really busy. Before we get on to what you've been doing recently though, one thing I've always been wanting to ask you since I read some of the intros for your new book, the Domino Diaries, My Decade Boxing with Olympic Champions and Chasing Hemingway's Ghost in the Last Days of Castro's Cuba. You actually opened the book up, I believe, with an article, well, a bit on Mike Tyson, and you actually blagged your way into his house while he was smoking the biggest reefer this side of Marrakesh. What? How did that come about, mate?
I was given his phone number by Freddie Roach, I think as kind of a dare to see what would happen. And he said, "This is the assistant's phone number. You're never going to get in, but it's a place to start." And I think what he misunderstood was just how desperate I was. So I harassed, the guy's name was Daryl, and I called him 140 times over the next month until finally, to get rid of me, he just said, "Fine, come over." And so I did. I went all the way out to Las Vegas, and he was supposed to meet me at one of the casinos. I was stood up. I thought everything was for nothing, and called Daryl again. "Hey, Daryl, I'm in Las Vegas." And he said, "Well, it's going to have to be at his house." So he gave me the address, which was about 12 miles outside of Las Vegas in Henderson, gated community. I showed up to the security gate, and there was a Range Rover on the other side, this ominous roll down window that just pointed where to follow. I gave my name, and 2 minutes later I'm walking in through that haze and smoke of a lot of weed, and about 3 minutes later I noticed a big head, the back of a big head above the backing of a couch. And I was looking where Tyson was, and then suddenly I noticed that big head turn around, and it was him. And then he just marched down, and I don't know if I can swear.
Yeah, on you go, mate. On you go.
Well, Tyson started down the stairs, and he glared at me, and he just said, "How did this white motherfucker get into my house?" And I thought, this is either going to not last very long at all, or this is going to go somewhere interesting. And fortunately, he was generous enough to let me stay for an hour and talk to him, and I think that was kind of the beginning of my journalistic career.
Was you intimidated in any sort of way when you first met him?
Good God, I was intimidated. I thought I was going to be forcefully removed from the house as an unconscious heap. But, I came there, with a lot of, I think something that's unusual in terms of what Tyson has faced in his career is gratitude. And I met Tyson sort of through his history with bullying. I was a bullied kid, and that's what turned me on to boxing. That, after I heard his story, that I went to places I'd never been before, which was a library and a boxing gym. And so those two places really changed my life for the better. And I wrote him a letter in prison when I was 14 just to say thank you. Your story really saved my life, and your story was the first one I ever read in a library. And boxing, has been part of my life ever since. 22 years later, I mean, this is all I do. So he looked almost intimidated about, this guy must be crazy. Like, the only thing crazier than Mike Tyson is having Mike Tyson as a hero when you're a kid. It's not exactly easy telling your girlfriend, I really admire this guy, given his reputation. So that kind of took it somewhere, I think, pretty unusual with that interview. And selling that story was sort of my entry into boxing journalism, which I didn't really have any background in. So from there, writing books about Cuba, and he'd been to Cuba in 2002. I was in Cuba at that time. So there were a lot of weird angles and parallels and counterpoints with his life and mine that, just, I guess, allowed for some opportunities to happen, because they were pretty strange and unusual. So that's kind of how it unfolded.
One thing I remember reading, actually, especially on the Mike Tyson bit, was, or I think it was a comment stated, it could be dangerous to meet your heroes. Did you feel that you were in any sort of danger with Mike Tyson in any sort of way? I mean, how did they come across when you finally got up and sat down for an hour and chatted away and stuff? I mean, obviously he's had his problems in the past, shall we say? Then obviously the tragic death of his daughter and stuff, which I believe he may have touched upon as well.
Hmm. Well, I think it is dangerous for anybody to meet your heroes if you expect your heroes to be simple and you expect your heroes to be clean. Um, Mike Tyson doesn't carry baggage with him. He carries, an emotional warehouse worth of baggage. And so I wasn't, I knew his history. I mean, regardless of whether or not he was guilty of raping Desiree Washington, he confessed that he was guilty of 6 or 7 other things that were worse than what he was accused of with Desiree Washington. So, Mike Tyson has done a lot of harm in the world, but I, as I say, I kind of came to him about from the perspective of how he was victimized as a kid. Before he became the baddest man on the planet, he was somebody who ran away from every fight that was offered to him. And so I was fascinated by how he would be able to sort of transition from a cowardly, timid, lisping, world-class victim to such an intimidating construct of a nightmare in boxing. Um, and I mean, so I found that he was very vulnerable and open to talking about that. There were a couple of moments where we were talking about his mother, where he broke down crying. Um, and then there was just some stuff later on. I interviewed him again for Amazon, and I ended up being the first person to ever ask him if he was sexually molested, which he confirmed. He suggested that in his memoir and didn't really say exactly what happened. He just mentioned that somebody had abducted him and tried to molest him. And I said, you never returned to it to say what happened. Like, were you? Was it, I hate to say successful, but you know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
did
yeah.
this actually happen? Because for my money, that explains a lot of who Mike Tyson is. You think of a lot of his famous quotes, they're scary and they have a lot of sexual innuendo. It's very disturbing. And of course, he's famous as a sexual victimizer. But I thought maybe he was a sexual victim to start off, and it turned out that was the case. So it's been an unusual run over the years. I never really thought he would live long enough that I'd ever have an opportunity to thank him for the positive impact he had, or really to talk to him about any of these things. So um, yeah, I think I feel fortunate that he did live long enough to make it. A lot of my heroes ended up suicides, and he certainly seemed headed down that path.
Certainly reading his book anyway. I read his book, must have been about a year ago. How that guy never ended up dead, the amount of drugs he took, and I mean, as you say, he went to Cuba, he was all over the world, he was on yachts, he was in Chechnya, he was in Russia, all over the place, just getting high and women and stuff like that. I always found when I read Ray Leonard's book, there was some sort of kind of parallels between their life, as you say, as Tyson was abused. Leonard confirms that he had been in a situation where he'd maybe been taken advantage of. There'd been violence at home, and drugs and alcohol and stuff. It's crazy.
Yeah, and I think there's always been a lot of weird, strange stuff. I wrote an article on the 25th anniversary of the Buster Douglas fight back in February called After the Fall for SB Nation, and it was kind of investigating what was really going on up in the Catskills with Custamato and that house. I was always fascinated by it, and I kind of just discovered that really nobody wants to talk about it. The only people who will talk about it are the ones who try to deify Custamato, that he was the most brilliant man they ever met and a saint. But how does a 70-year-old guy create this kind of repository of so many young, troubled kids staying in his house? And, where did he get the money to open up this gym? Why was he ostracized from boxing after nurturing Floyd Patterson and Jose Torres, and then Tyson as this great revenge on the sport? Like, there seemed a lot of unfinished business there. And I was always curious why the moment you raise Custamato with Mike Tyson, his voice starts to
Yeah,
crack. And I just thought, okay, I understand the popular narrative of the old guy who salvaged this wild youth and all of that, but there's more to this. There's a lot more to this. And I tried to sort of circle the wagons a bit to find out what it was, but it's a story that doesn't want to be told. I guess that's the best way I can put it.
Nobody's got the guts to tell it, really.
mean, do you
Yeah,
think-
or yeah.
Do you think it will ever be told, though? Do you think anyone will pry that far? Do you think Mike himself will perhaps open up to it a bit more?
Well, I'd be really curious. There was a biography written about Custamato, and I interviewed the author of that extensively. I interviewed some people who lived in the home. Doing a lot of research, there was a lot of smoke to suggest Custamato may have been a homosexual. Floyd Patterson was quoted by Gay Talese back in the 1950s as saying he slept in the same bed as D'Amato, that he was awoken one night with D'Amato sort of rubbing his foot against him in kind of a strange way. He was quoted as saying he felt D'Amato may have been sexually attracted to him. And you just think, wow, like this is the 1950s, and how different is, as a prototype, is Mike Tyson to Floyd Patterson? There's a lot of parallels there. And, okay, maybe it's all altruism and all of that, but in this day and age with Bill Cosby and Jerry Sandusky and that kind of stuff, it's considered improper to ask these questions until all the evidence is there. But the evidence is never going to all be there. So it's...
Got to dig for it, basically.
Yeah, it's... As I say, I'm not trying to slander a dead person, and there's nobody I've ever found who filed a sexual complaint against them, but there was a lot of strange stuff from that time. And a lot of those people were very damaged souls to begin with, and they went further towards being damaged afterwards. So I was always curious about it. And, one of the things Mike Tyson said was that whenever he's giving those wonderful quotes that I think Hemingway would have cut off his leg to have written himself, a lot of times he's quoting people. And the quote that always fascinated me the most with Mike Tyson was that terribly arresting line during the Lennox Lewis fight where he said, "Bitch, I'll fuck you till you love me, faggot."
Yeah.
And one of the things I asked him was, were you quoting somebody when you said that? Did somebody say that to you and you were quoting it back to us? Because that's, if I deconstruct that line, the idea of being raped and then loving the person who victimized you, it says a lot about Mike Tyson, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
It's very evocative. But as I say, I didn't find an answer. I found a lot of questions and a lot of people who just did not want to go near the subject matter. So
I just find it fascinating because the usual narrative with Custamato and Mike Tyson is what if Custamato had lived on? Would he have fashioned Mike into an even greater fighter? And with news like this and or possible revelations like this, should I say? It makes you think maybe he did fashion him into the fighter that he is anyway. The abused. Just the monster that he sort of became, and in the public, and the way he just reacted to in so many of these bad situations. Maybe Custamato did cause that as well, like you say, through all of the just the domestic abuse and things like that.
Well, I think one of the most telling lines that Custamato offered the world was to instill in his fighters I think the exact quote was, "Make all their causes a lie." And to me, the most revelatory thing about Mike Tyson is that I think always he made a lie his life's cause. I think he was always a brilliant con man. I mean, he's very intelligent. Anybody who spent time with him will tell you, like, instinctually, emotionally, his literacy is off the charts at reading you, at finding out the things that you want to conceal. And as somebody who spent a lot of time interviewing people, you will always learn more about people from what they try to conceal from you rather than the stuff they're trying to reveal. And I think that Tyson, to stay relevant the way he has, let's remember, he's on the cover of Sports Illustrated when he's 18. We're 30 years later, and he's still not just on the back pages of all newspapers around the world, but he still gets on the front pages of newspapers around the world. He transcends boxing. And very few people have ever done that, really, during that span. I mean, even Floyd Mayweather, if we weren't talking about how much money he's earning, he's just not really relevant other than when he's breaking the law. But Tyson always had the world's fascination, and I don't think that just happened. I think it's more a byproduct of his genius at marketing himself, at repackaging himself, at constantly surprising us. I mean, if this is just what he's portrayed in the media stereotypically as just an animal, just a criminal, just an id, it seems kind of like it doesn't make sense that he continually has surprised us and stayed relevant for 30 years in such a notoriously, the attention span of the 24-hour media cycle is just so fickle and brief, and yet he's always found a way to surprise us. And surprise is an element in any story that really stays with people. And so I don't think he's ever gotten credit for coming up with storylines, coming up with quotes that have been able to stick with us. And I think he deserves that credit, whether for good or bad. I mean, he's now this tremendously reformed character in American life. And yet what a history he has of wrongdoing and all of that as well. It's just, he's just an incredible character. Not to say a positive character, but just in terms of being interesting. He provokes discussion. He provokes interest. He begs us to ask more questions, and there aren't a lot of those.
It's true that, because if you think about it, if you go back in history and look at some of the probably the great fighters and that, and how many documentaries we've ever made about them, you've got Sugar Ray Robinson and Muhammad Ali's probably the main two, and then the next one up on the list probably Mike Tyson. I mean, I don't think even Manny Pacquiao and Floyd Mayweather actually even got those type of inside documentaries to what like Tyson and Ali had.
Oh, I totally agree. I mean, I think that a lot of these great fighters. It's not that they're one note, but I mean, after, Oscar De La Hoya was an incredibly marketable fighter who transcended the sport in terms of how it was sold. 70% of the people buying pay-per-views and tickets were women. I mean, it's unprecedented in the sport. But when he leaves, he's nowhere near part of the sort of national or international discussion. And yet Tyson is still there. Whenever Tyson's traveling to a country, he's meeting political leaders. He's meeting the most famous people because he fascinates regardless of national borders. And, I just think it's like if you kind of reduce these great athletes or great characters the world has, I mean, Tyson is a symphony. He's not just a simple little one-off pop song like a lot of the other people. There's a lot of depth to what's going on there.
Do you believe there's parallels in that sense to Muhammad Ali then? That obviously there was a lot more to his character, I think, and the fact that he put himself out there, he put himself and made these stories himself, about what he's doing and made himself a real media figure. I think those two fighters are perhaps just the two most famous of all time. I mean, people who have no interest in boxing, no following of boxing, they couldn't name you a single boxer in the past 10, 15 years, but they know who Mike Tyson is, and they know who Muhammad Ali is. Do you think they share that sort of parallel,
I think they do. I would argue that Tyson has surpassed Ali in the sense that Ali always required a dance partner. Ali, when we think of him, we can't think of him without the duets that he had with Joe Frazier, with Foreman, with the backdrop of things that were going on. There's always something accompanying his relevance and what makes you want to talk about him, which isn't to diminish that he's not an incredibly charismatic character, and all he achieved with his career, which I think was far more than Tyson ever did. Tyson didn't need to have an opponent. Nobody would say who is Mike Tyson fighting in order to buy his pay-per-views. I think Tyson at the time broke all pay-per-view records fighting a Peter McNeely, and made $300 or $400 million after prison fighting nobodies because people didn't care. He was just that interesting. Ali did need dance partners. He did need the backdrop of civil rights and all of that, and these incredible performances that he had. Tyson didn't need that, and there's very few people in boxing who don't need a tremendous rivalry to remain such a fixation of interest. So I think that sets Tyson apart in a way. I think there's something that remains unresolved, even though, as you were saying, he's one of the most scrutinized public figures, not just athletes, but public figures in American history. I mean, who has had more written about them? And a lot of that is by virtue of the age in which he was on the rise. But nonetheless, as I said before, he still retains the ability to surprise us. And I can't think of somebody who has been more exposed in public life than him with his history.
Just moving on, Jonathan. Sorry, Bryn, to your documentary. Now, apologies, I didn't manage to get anybody in the UK to try and take it up. I spoke to a colleague, as you know, who's got a sister who works for the BBC. Unfortunately, didn't get a response, which was quite disappointing. How far along are you with a buyer now? I know you had chats with people in the UK and stuff, and some television companies. How far along were you getting this more mainstream now? Your documentary on Rigondeaux and Tefilio Stevenson, and you're looking at the political life and basically the public life of people in Cuba.
Well, I kind of put it on the back burner to focus on putting out the Domino Diaries, which tells a lot of a very similar story in many respects, interviewing the same Cuban Olympic boxers and giving this sort of dialectic between Cuba and the United States, and Cuban athletes, Olympic athletes, being the most lucrative human cargo on earth as they're smuggled over to the U.S. Where that's kind of going is I participated in a radio documentary about the history between Guillermo Rigondeaux and Gary Hyde, and their relationship just ended very recently.
A few weeks back, yeah.
That's right. So it looks like I'm kind of in discussion with the documentarian who made that about focusing something new on that relationship between Gary Hyde and Rigondeaux, rather than the sort of overview that I did in my documentary, which maybe that'll come out sooner or later. I did show it in New York at a film festival, and we'll see. But now we kind of have the whole arc of the Rigondeaux-Gary Hyde story. And for my money, Gary Hyde was probably the most interesting character that I ever interviewed for meeting all those Cuban athletes, because he allowed outsiders to sort of have a way in, that they could identify with. Gary Hyde was just somebody, when presented with the option of, you need a superstar over here in Ireland, you need somebody that people really want to pay to see. And he just thought, well, why not Cuba? And all the reasons were there about, well, you could be arrested, you could spend decades in prison just for talking to these guys about coming out. And he thought, well, I'll be the first guy to go over there and try to get one out. And I just found that such an incredible story. I mean, just this guy who had the balls and the wherewithal to negotiate that minefield and go over there and become the first guy to negotiate a contract and then figure out a way logistically to get him over to the U.S. It was an incredible story, and I felt bad almost with my documentary that I wasn't able to make something else really focusing on him and what he went over and did. I mean, it's just a very complicated, dark, strange, at times very funny, unusual story. And obviously with Guillermo's rise, it had some incredible twists and turns and developments and surprises. So that might be something down the road that could come out sooner than later.
I mean, obviously as well, we heard today that the WBO are on the brink of perhaps stripping Rigondeaux of his title. It is concerning, but it's also a bit of a disappointment that one of the most natural talents in the sport today is actually, I wouldn't want to say getting laid to waste, but technically that's what it is. He's not active. I think he's got Caribe in his ear about issues with Gary Hyde and stuff. Finally, that's come to an end. So you would think after the Gary Hyde situation had come to an end, Caribe would actually have got him a fight by now. But there's nothing in the pipeline. Have you heard anything about what was happening next with Rigondeaux?
There was a rumor I read a couple days ago that he's looking to fight on the undercard of Arislandi Lara in Miami or in southern Florida, at least. I think it was Miami. But no, it's been very, very difficult. The promoter that he's with, as you mentioned, Caribe, to my knowledge, they haven't promoted a fight. in the years that they've been an active promoter. So there's a pretty big stumbling block and limitation there, that they don't have the track record or the fighters to offer Rigondeaux, and Rigondeaux's been blackballed by television, pay-per-view, by the major outlets, HBO, Showtime. So he's kind of left the political bind of Cuba to step into America's version of politics with boxing, where, from fighting under a dictator to fighting under capitalism, there are politics involved, and you have to play ball. And if you're not somebody who's willing to learn English, you're not somebody who's fighting in a style that people really want to pay to see, you're not selling tickets, and pretty much anybody who fights you is going to lose. That's not a wonderful proposition. If you or me are a promoter and we have a guy who could fight him, why would we want to sacrifice, where our guy is positioned in boxing only to lose, and we're responsible for the lion's share of putting asses in seats? That's a tough sell, and that's what he's faced. And I think he's been pretty rigid and resentful about compromising there, which is a tough stance. And I think you're seeing the effects of it, which is very frustrating. I think for fans of him, it's been very frustrating for me to see, just because I was along for a lot of that journey once he came to the U.S. and I met him back in Cuba, and I hoped after Donaire. I thought the Donaire performance, I still think, is one of the most underrated of the last 10 years. I think if Mayweather had done that to Pacquiao, people would cite it as the masterpiece of his career. And let's remember that Rigondeaux was a 3-1 underdog when he fought Donaire. Donaire was coming off being the ESPN Fighter of the Year. He was a tremendously exciting fighter. He made his biggest payday fighting Rigondeaux, but that didn't go the way people thought. And some people in the media, Dan Rafael in particular, have made it kind of a pet cause to just lash out and bash Rigondeaux at every opportunity, turn him into a joke. I think that's unfortunate. I think it lacks a lot of compassion, given this is a guy, let's remember, who had to abandon his wife and 2 kids back in Cuba to try and fulfill his dream. So, I mean, I hope there's some kind of magical solution. There were a lot of twists and turns that were positive when Gary Hyde was steering the ship a little more. And I guess we'll see what Caribe can do, but I haven't seen much evidence so far that, there's any urgency to really get him in the ring, which I just don't understand, because this is a guy who's going to be 35 years old, or sorry, just turned 35.
Allegedly.
Well, I think he probably is 35. I mean, he fought in the 2000 Olympics, so he would be 20 back then. I've heard those rumors. I don't really believe it, but nonetheless, he's at least 35 years old, and for a lightweight guy who's this Stradivarius of an athlete, these are the lighter weights are the ones who mature faster. So it's a real shame to me that he could have been doing this since 2000 as a professional. By now he could have had a 15-year professional career, making huge amounts of money and putting on tremendous performances against all the great fighters there were during that era. And we just haven't seen him all that much. And now people are bypassing him and, getting that shine with HBO and Showtime. And I think he's got a bit of a raw deal from critics. So
why do you think that the American media have turned on him then? I mean, obviously, there's other sort of similar styles and similar fighters. There's the boring aspect that a lot of people throwing around. I mean, that's a very limited view of it, I think. But there's the likes of Andre Ward, which a lot of media seem to just praise him endlessly. I mean, HBO seem to be right up his arse, basically.
Dan Rafael, yep.
Yeah, Dan Rafael as well. And he's been leveled as having a very boring style as well, but for some reason Rigondeaux seems to get all of this disdain and the blackballing. I mean, why do you think that is?
Well, I think Cubans are kind of easy for a lot of these journalists to lay into, because if you're Puerto Rican and you fight in New York, you're gonna and you're exciting at all, you're gonna sell out New York. And if you're a Mexican and you're exciting, and dominant, you're going to sell out California. You know, you've got a fan base where you can make money, you can get people buying your pay-per-view, and the live gate is going to be good. You're a Cuban, there's nowhere to fight. There's nobody clamoring to watch Cubans in terms of putting out money to watch them. So you can bash them away, you can bash their style. I mean, Rigondeaux going into Donaire, what Raphael and a number of other critics said was, you know, he's just an amateur. He's just an amateur. What is he going to do against a real professional like Donaire? And what I said was, then if that's the way you're going to frame this, then I think you have to go back and look at all the great Cuban fighters who never came over, and let's see what Guillermo does. And if he kicks the shit out of Donaire like he did, where he, you know, grossly outthrew him, outhit him, dominated him. I mean, within a round or two, Donaire gave up. Donaire stopped throwing because he knew if he did try to put on a fight, he was going to be knocked out inside of 3 rounds.
Yeah, they would counter all night, wouldn't they? I mean, if Donaire tried to lead that fight, he was just going to get picked apart.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, I've always said with Guillermo that, you know, there's nothing that Mayweather can do that Guillermo can't do as well, except that Guillermo can punch. I mean, he can drop you with one hand. And, you know, he's done it again and again. I mean, 15 fights, he's knocked out 10 of his guys. When I was making a highlight reel of him for my documentary, up until Donaire, he had knocked down every single opponent and knocked out most of them. And yet he's a boring fighter. I mean,
that's what confuses me as well. I mean, like you say, he's got this power, he's got this ability to just completely flatten his opponents, and maybe the ire comes sometimes from that he chooses not to. He chooses to, you know, box beautifully, as it were. But the fact that he can do it, and he does do it, you know, very frequently, it's baffling that people, you know, chastise him for it.
I think it's analogous with, you know, if you think of Michael Jordan disdaining the slam dunk and saying, you know what, I'm just going to lay the ball in every time I'm on a breakaway. There's an element of that with Guillermo. Like, once he's established his dominance, there is a feeling of, why should I risk more? Why do you deserve to see me do anything more? Once I've taken out your top guy who's favored against me, isn't it enough to show my dominance? And I think that's so frustrating and disappointing for where boxing is today, where you're a long way away from, say, Willie Pep winning a round without throwing a punch. Nobody is clamoring for some defensive genius to come in there and not throw a punch. Nobody's clamoring, you know, for some of the great defensive geniuses of the last 20 years. Oh, I wish they were here to fight, because people now, they want the knockout. They want a Golovkin. They want people willing to get in there and put on tremendous action. And that's not Guillermo's orientation. And I think he resents the idea that he should lower himself to that kind of fighting, because he feels, well, anybody can do that. But who can do what I can do? Nobody. I mean, really nobody. There's nobody who can do it to the level that I'm doing it. Even Floyd Mayweather cannot fight my style. He doesn't have the skill set. So shouldn't that mean that I'm respected? And the answer is flatly no, because that's not where the culture is right now in terms of what people want. So that's a difficult battle for him. And, you know, I, on some level, respect him, but on the other hand, I understand the resentment as well.
The other thing, Brin, was the fact, you know, I know we mentioned, you know, allegedly he's 35 years old and stuff. I mean, the other point is he's in a division that's quite bereft of talent, basically, shall we say. I mean, the other so-called champions are ducking him. Carol Frampton, Scott Quigg, they don't want nothing at all to do with him. Leo Santa Cruz would rather go north than come back down south again to fight him. It is a worry at his age, considering what he's done as an amateur, allegedly something like 400 amateur fights, probably more. I think there was not word about a potential eye injury and stuff. You know, I just wonder if well, I would say he's past his peak now, and I think we're not really going to see much more or the best of him, shall we say. I think the Donaire fight probably was his apex, and I can't see him probably topping that, because I just don't think anybody else wants to fight him to prove that he is the best out there.
Well, I think Lomachenko, it sounded like there was a discussion there, and Guillermo and his promoters, or his promoters, wanted a lot more money than anybody was willing to offer them for him to fight Lomachenko, which I think is very unfortunate, because I think if he was capable at this point, and I think it's a tough fight to call about who I would favor. I've had arguments with some of the people who I worked on the film with, who became very intimately acquainted with Guillermo, about who would win that fight between him and Lomachenko, because I have extraordinary respect for Lomachenko and his ability. I think Guillermo was a superior fighter in his prime, but as you say, he's 35. Lomachenko definitely has several years on him in terms of with youth playing a major factor. I still think it's almost an even fight. I might slightly favor Guillermo, but I think for boxing purists, there's never been, you know, two-time Olympic champions is exciting, and Lomachenko doesn't really have boring fights. He is somebody who's brave, and he's going to bring the fight to Guillermo, which is exactly what's going to bring out the best in Rigondeaux. So it's a shame to me that a fight like that couldn't get made, because
Yeah.
I think it would give him that opportunity. I mean, I think Lomachenko is a hell of a lot better fighter than Donaire, and Donaire was no joke when Guillermo beat him. I think that much of Lomachenko. So I would love to see Guillermo have that opportunity. I mean, Guillermo is the coolest cat that I've ever come across, in terms of, I was in a lot of those dressing rooms with him before those fights, including Donaire, and I mean, he is just as calm as can be. Like, I mean, he is just such a consummate winner. I think he's not afraid to challenge anybody. I mean, even if he was 50 years old, I think part of him would say, yeah, why couldn't I fight whoever's champ? So it's a shame that that hasn't happened, and it's looking less and less likely that it will happen. Yeah, it's unfortunate.
Thanks for reminding me about the Lomachenko one, actually, because when you mentioned that, I just recalled actually speaking to Gary Hyde about a YouTube video that Lomachenko released. Now you mentioned it, yet I think Lomachenko claimed that their side wanted more money. So I forwarded the YouTube link on to Gary Hyde, and Gary Hyde came back to me and he said, first I heard about Rigo turning down this fight. So the offer must have been made from Top Rank to Caribe Promotions, perhaps, I don't know. But as you say, it's a bloody shame that fight probably won't happen. And I think Lomachenko's been quite steadfast by saying, or quite resolute by saying that that fight cannot happen at a catchweight.
Yeah, there's been those stipulations. I mean, I think the thought was that Guillermo might go up a couple pounds to meet Lomachenko, but I mean, we're not talking about much weight here. So, I mean, frankly, I don't understand why Guillermo at this point in his career wouldn't want a showcase fight like that. That's going to demand, probably pay-per-view attention, and you knock out a Lomachenko, I think people again are forced to really reevaluate Guillermo. I mean, if he can put on that definitive performance in front of an American audience, all those critics who've been dismissing him as being dull, I think it would give him that chance for some kind of late stage career where he'd get the right attention, have the ability to sort of galvanize some momentum behind him, which would be a nice way for his career to sort of come to a close.
Are you worried then, do you think, that maybe Rigondeaux is perhaps on the slide, or that, at any moment, because he is, advancing in age, and as you say, the age matters so much more at these weights. Do you worry that he is maybe just one fight away from being shot or losing those reflexes? I mean, we saw in the Amagasa fight. I mean, how long ago was that? Maybe about 10 months.
Wasn't it?
Yeah, about 10 months ago now, wasn't it? We saw him get, knocked down a couple of times there. He got back up, he shook it off, as it were, but they were heavy knockdowns and he got clipped. And you worry that maybe Rigondeaux, it's just losing a touch slightly. And if it's a touch too much, then obviously he's going to suffer for it.
Well, no question. I mean, 35 years old for his weight class is ancient. There's no question. I mean, as you say, maybe he's older. I don't know. I haven't asked him to produce a birth certificate, but regardless, he's at least 35, and that's old. And for somebody with his reflexes, the strength and conditioning coaches that I spoke with over the years who had worked with him said far and away he's the best athlete they've ever seen. And without his reflexes, without his timing, I mean, that's his bread and butter. I mean, beyond his obvious technical supremacy, but just losing an inch in this game, you're always susceptible. I mean, every boxer who walks into the ropes is accepting that in any moment they could face permanent injury or death. And I'd hate to see that, hate to see him go out, and to see him get knocked down by the likes of I mean, Amorosa, as you say, like to see him get knocked down twice against somebody who's not exactly the most respected fighter in the world, in the middle of Japan. I mean, Rigondeaux being forced to fly around the world to get fights. Yeah, it's it should have been better for him. You know, I thought for sure after Donaire he would have many more opportunities in front of a big audience. I mean, I personally found that to be a very exciting fight. Whereas executives who were there from HBO, people were angry, and I mean, Bob Arum was angry. So he's left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. I don't agree with it, but I mean, what say do I have in terms of putting him back on TV or putting him on pay-per-view undercards? He did have a lot of opportunities, so I just hope he makes the most of what he has going forward.
But who do you think's to blame then for the way his career's gone since the Donaire fight? I mean, obviously he's had a few people working against him, but ultimately, you know, he's had choices in his own career with Caribe. I mean, there's a lot of talk of Caribe being in his ear. Who do you think is ultimately to blame?
Well, I think the fighter is always responsible. You know, I mean, with him, it's harder to say that because, you know, with Cuban athletes, you know, the average Cuban athlete who's coming out today, the average Cuban who's coming out on the boat that Guillermo was on, somebody's paying $10,000 per person. You know, for all of those people who are going to Mexico, there's over 10,000 a year who are going to Mexico. And the average price is $10,000 for each of those people, men, women, and children, and even more for athletes. So once these guys get here, they're shipwrecked in a country where they don't speak the language. They've never had a bank account. They have no understanding of anything works in the United States or under a capitalistic system. They've been looked after, you know, all facets of their life by the communist state. It's that culture shock that becomes the biggest opponent for them, not the fighting, but just trying to adjust. And he went through that. I mean, he lost a parent. I mean, his father disowned him when he tried to leave. His mother died. The wife and kids are back home. You know, there's so much there behind the scenes with this guy that he was fighting against that I, as I say, I really admire his courage and professionalism to accomplish what he has. But I do think it's bled into the look of bitterness that he has. There's a look of resentment. There's a coldness to him that is not endearing to fans. There's a certain look of disdain that he has that I find it compelling and fascinating, but I know it puts a lot of people off. And, you know, not learning English, not really trying to meet the world halfway. It's very hard in this world to say, fuck you, and have people want to do things for you. And there is an element to his personality is like, haven't I done enough? Like, Dan Rafael saying, like, this guy doesn't risk anything. I think Guillermo's thinking, you know, I was in a smuggler's boat with a gun against my head until somebody paid a ransom for me to be bought and sold, you know, like slaves were, you know, back in the 1520s. And you think I haven't risked anything? What are you risking?
A heart attack.
Yeah, a heart attack, right. But I mean, I think there's just that element that to be treated so disrespectfully as a human being, to have Bob Arum say, oh, after Donaire, you know, I need Fidel Castro to come over here to promote this guy. You know, you just think like, wow, like that a Jewish man would say that about, you know, like equate, I need a dictator to help me, as if there's no political, emotional damage that this guy's going through. To be insensitive to that. And I raised the Jewish thing only to say that if somebody made that analogy about Hitler with a Jewish fighter, could you imagine the headlines that would be, you know, thrown up? And yet all of this sort of disdain toward Cubans, where they're just all painted with the same broad brush about just, oh, it's a boring style. They're boring. They're cold. They're indifferent. They're arrogant. My view, you know, having written 2 books about it and a lot of articles, is just to say, no, these guys are tremendously wounded. They're damaged emotionally. And shouldn't they be getting some credit for how accomplished they are? I mean, you dismiss them all as just amateur fighters, but I mean, they were kicking the shit out of the world when they were 18 and then 22. It's not like they were all 30 fighting kids when they were winning. They were all winning when they were young. And Guillermo was no different. Guillermo could have been, I think, an undefeated fighter for 10 or 15 years as a pro if he turned pro after the first Olympic medal. And, he never had that opportunity. He was making peanuts over in Cuba, watching as fighters he beat went on to make millions of dollars. And that has a pretty tragic impact in terms of your world outlook. Not that everybody needs to be sympathetic to it, but I guess that's where I'm coming from when I sort of size up, I think he's responsible for things that he could have done to make him more marketable, but I understand why he didn't do them, because I think he's in a lot of pain.
Do you think there's a worry actually that Caribe may take advantage of him, and then when his career is over, he's going to be left broke and he's going to be nowhere else to go, and he's going to be basically stranded probably in Florida and not be able to get back home to see his family? I mean, is the travel restrictions been lifted on him to be able to travel back to Cuba?
I think they just changed it, so now that I think it's after 7 years you can go back. Some of the first baseball players went back and visited their family. So, that will be. I mean, Guillermo left in February of 2009, so we're coming up on that very soon. And I mean, he has a new woman that he's involved with in Miami. He has I believe a new child. So he's been trying to make a new life, and I don't know where any of that has been left, because I haven't spoken to him in I think a year and a half or so. So yeah, it's tough to put yourself in the shoes of people who've gone through what people like him have. But I don't know if he wants to go back to Cuba. I know that he tremendously loves his son, and missed his family while I was spending time with him. But obviously, he's made some other choices to adjust to his new world, that some may disagree with. I don't know. I never really tried to judge him about that stuff, because I haven't been in his place, and I don't know if I would have done better than the choices that he made.
One fighter actually I remember reading about, he was Cuban. He actually didn't have any of these problems about having to wait 7 years to go back to Cuba and stuff. Was Richard Abril, I believe. I think he's allowed to come and go as he pleased. Is that right? Just wondering what the reason was behind that.
I haven't. I remember coming across that story, and I don't remember the specifics with it. But I believe you're right. I believe he is able to come and go in kind of an unusual dynamic by Cuban athletic standards.
So as of the political situation just now, I mean, Alex kind of filled me in. I kind of fell away from the political scene after the Scottish referendum last year and stuff. It was just a complete and utter nightmare. I kind of fell away from politics, and I've kind of lost interest in it altogether. What is the current situation between America and Cuba just now?
Well, the Americans are allowed to travel if they have a purpose, basically, that's not straight up tourism. So almost all the restrictions have been lifted, and en masse, Americans are traveling there for the first time. A lot of the restrictions have been lifted for Cuban Americans to go back and visit their family. They can send more money back to their family. All of this was heavily restricted by the American government. The Cuban government has never restricted any of the Americans for visiting. It's the American government's embargo. Almost every nation, I believe, except for Israel in the United Nations, has opposed the sanctions that the U.S. has against Cuba. Obama removed Cuba from the axis of evil that George Bush, I think, put them on. We're talking about a country where most people don't have gas for their car, and somehow they're sponsors of terror. I don't quite understand that.
Tremendous. Only George W. could come up with shit like that.
Yeah, I mean, so I think that a lot of that travel is happening with Americans. I think they love the idea of the forbidden fruit, and they're passionate about seeing those, 1950s American cars, and smoking Cuban cigars, and going to the Hemingway bars, and interacting and learning more about the culture, and having television personalities go over there. You're seeing Anthony Bourdain and Conan O'Brien and all of these people showcasing kind of a cartoonish version of Havana, that I don't think is the reality for Cubans, because the Cubans I speak to say things are not really improving for them. But as far as Americans are concerned, they get to sort of do what they do best and be tourists, and extract what they want from a new, previously forbidden paradise in many ways. But yeah.
Just finally on Rigo before we move on. If he can't get fights at 120, do you really think he could end up rolling up at the PBC at some point and get fights that way? Maybe move down to 118.
Well, I think the issue has been either him or Caribe, or the both of them, have just been very difficult to negotiate with some of these external entities like the PBC and Al Heyman and the promotional companies. They have been stonewalling offers, saying that they believe they're worth a lot more money than others are willing to pay them. So they've shown a lot of obstinacy in terms of, coming down, I guess, in their price to get Rigo fighting. So I guess we wonder, are they going to get desperate? How much money does Rigo have at this point? How much pressure is he going to put on Caribe to start accepting some of those offers? And of course, if he gets into one of these fights where somebody knocks him down and he doesn't get up, then where's he left? Well, we've seen that story many, many times in boxing, where he just becomes a name. He just becomes an Olympic champion for somebody else to, beat up on. And I hope that doesn't happen, but this sport has chewed up a lot bigger names than Guillermo Rigondeaux and spit them out. So I hope he just gets a fight like a Lomachenko fight, or at least can be more active, can make some money, and can put on some performances to sort of, as I mentioned before, get some momentum with his career before he retires.
Now, obviously, one of the main reasons for us talking to you today, Brin, was the fact that you've been spending a lot of time with probably one of the greatest fighters in the last, shall we say, 20 years, one of the most athletic, gifted fighters in the last 20 years anyway. One of the first fighters to go from light middleweight to heavyweight and win titles right all the way through, Roy Jones Jr. Now, I believe you actually came across Roy via Jim Lampley, is that right?
That's right. Jim Lampley offered me an introduction.
It was crazy because I was actually listening to Patrick Connor's podcast actually. Next minute, you came on and stuff, and you're at Roy Jones's house, and you hear the chickens in the background and the roosters and stuff. And next minute he's on the bloody phone speaking to Patrick Connor. I'm saying to myself, my God, I need to get this happening to me. So tell me, Brin, have you got Roy Jones in your house just now to bring on the podcast?
Unfortunately, no. We haven't become, best friends forever. But yeah, there was a week with him. And just at the time where they scheduled that interview, I felt uncomfortable because I'm there on a job to write a profile about Roy, but he was just a really good sport. And when I put it to him, do you want to go on this thing and talk to somebody you have no idea who they are? He was just like, yeah, give me the fucking phone. So, okay. And I'll go.
I mean, what is Roy like as a person? I mean, I know he's had a lot of, we'll talk about Rigondeaux there, for instance, some of these Cubans who come across to America, emotionally damaged and stuff. I would probably say, reading what I know about Roy, is he in any way sort of emotionally damaged as to what happened with him and his father as he grew up?
Oh my God, yes.
Absolutely. Mess, is he?
My father was a child protection lawyer, and before I could get writing off the ground, I did some work for him at his law firm. And I have never come across somebody, I think, who's gone through the amount of abuse, humiliation, and torment that Roy did growing up. And he took me, where he did road work. He would run 10 miles a day, 6 days a week, from the age of 10 until he went to the Olympics. And I crunched the numbers, and that's the equivalent of running from Los Angeles to New York every year. And from 10 until he went to the Olympics, it's also the equivalent of running around the circumference of Earth. That was the road work he was doing, where he'd be running with older people who were trying to beat him. And if they beat him before he got back home to his dad, Roy knew that there was a beating awaiting him, and that beating would be with whatever was handy for his dad to grab, a pipe, a bungee cord, a switch. I mean, this this guy has been through the ringer like almost nobody that I've ever met. And to answer your question about what he's really like, he is honestly one of the nicest people I've met in boxing. He is a really caring husband. He's a loyal friend to people in his community. I met several of his kids. He has 6 children. I really liked them. When I went to his house for the first day, he was a few hours late, so I ended up spending 3 hours with his 6-year-old son and his 10-year-old daughter, being shown around the property. He lives on 81 acres in Florida. There were 250 chickens and roosters everywhere. I mean, it's, they said, "Oh, Daddy killed a crocodile this morning in the pond." I'm just like, "Oh, okay, like this is the reality out here." So I was really taken aback. I was really surprised. I'd never met Roy before. I've met a lot of people in boxing. Interviewed Tyson, George Foreman, a lot of the big names. I'd never met Roy, and I came away thinking he's one of the most fascinating characters in the history of the sport, as well as what you just said before about him being probably the greatest athlete to ever lace up the gloves. And yet, one of the things he said to me that stuck in my mind, I was, typing up some of the interviews that I did with him, transcribing them, is he said, they always used to say I was the most gifted or the most talented. Try the hardest fucking worker who ever lived. That was me in my early days. Nobody worked harder than I did. And I thought, he's so right. He never got credit for just how hard he worked. And when he showed me what his day-to-day life was, I mean, like I mentioned, the road work, but I mean, the hours and hours and hours of sparring and training and that kind of taskmaster. I mean, he's just an exceptional person, just a fascinating character. And the fact that he came away from all of that abuse to not inflict it on other people. I mean, he's not like a Mike Tyson where he's out there abusing people, victimizing people. Roy seemed like a very decent guy who treated people pretty well. Not that he's perfect, not that he doesn't have flaws, but I was really, really impressed with him. And the tenor of the article is a bit that he's going to be 47 years old in January. It makes me a lot more uncomfortable with the idea that he's still going. I don't want to see this guy get hurt, and I think a lot of people who know him don't want to see that happen either.
We've been saying that for a while on this podcast, actually, and to be honest, Bryn, I've got to ask this question, but is it financially motivated? Is he struggling? Because there were rumours going about a few years back, before the Hopkins rematch, actually, that he was financially somewhat a struggle. But you're saying he's still got that 81-acre property and stuff like that, so it suggests that he's maybe still doing okay.
Well, I saw at least 2 properties that he owns other than the 81-acre. He had bought properties where some of his extended family lives. He is not a materialistic person. He drove me around in a truck around Pensacola. I've heard the house that he lives in on that 81 acres is a mansion. That is not a mansion. It's a house. He has his own gym. He has
basketball court.
Well, he has a little outdoor basketball court that, I mean, the idea that he has a home basketball court or something like that, I mean, it's just like any basketball court you'd see in any suburb across the United States. I mean, it was a modest, I mean, it's 81 acres. I mean, it's sprawling. I mean, it's half the size of Disneyland in terms of the spread. But it's not like this is an opulent, materialistic person at all. I didn't get any sense he's ostentatious. He liked to mow his own lawn. He liked, there was a bunch of brush to clear. He wanted to get up at 6 a.m. and clear it out himself. I don't think money is sort of where he's at. I'm aware of what you referred to, that he had back taxes that were in the neighborhood of $3 million a few years ago to deal with. I didn't ask him directly if money is a major factor. Other people have told me that it is, but I didn't see signs that he seems, that money is the reason he's doing it. I think he is as addicted to boxing as anybody who's ever done it. And I think he's struggling about what is his identity without boxing. As far as he's concerned, he wants to win a cruiserweight title, which nobody's ever done with his other accomplishments. I don't know if anybody gives a shit like that's not exactly the missing piece for most people in his legacy. I mean, he's done enough. But in his mind, the cruiserweight title is necessary because nobody's ever done it. So I don't really understand it personally. None of the people I've talked to who know him really understand it. But who are we to say you can't do it? He keeps passing neurological examinations, but then so did Muhammad Ali when he fought Larry Holmes and Trevor Berbick. So did Jermaine Taylor. So I hope he's okay. I hope he doesn't get hurt. But I don't like it. I don't like it.
The problem is, and I know Alex would probably agree with what I'm going to say here, is he's in a division just now that has a lot of monsters in it, monster punchers and stuff. And Roy's not Roy, shall we say, anymore. Roy the fighter is not Roy the fighter anymore. He's not got the speed. He's not got the foot movement. He's still got the left hook, though. I will give him that. But
So
these guys
in the Lebedev fight, didn't
the Lebedev fight was, I think Smoker has something against him that night after the way he got knocked out. I mean, guys like Kudryashov isn't a great boxer, but he's a tremendous puncher. Drozad's a good fighter as well. But if anything, I think he's got to be looking at perhaps some of the British fighters, Macronelli, maybe Oval McKenzie. We saw McKenzie face off against Victor Ramirez in Argentina last Friday. And I know Ramirez isn't a great fighter, but one thing he has got is this constant pressure. And if Roy can't hurt him, it's going to be a long, long, tough night for him.
Oh, I completely agree. I mean, 47 years old, where you're relying so much on reflexes and athleticism. He's a very different fighter. And his chin, when it was tested, unlike Muhammad Ali, Ali getting dropped by that bombshell that Frazier dropped on his chin, he's up at 3. Roy, the first time he got hit really hard by Tarver, he barely got up at 10 and was counted out. And 4 months later, we saw what happened with Glenn Johnson, where even with medical attention, it took 15 minutes to get him out of the ring. This is something that does separate him in terms of his second career from Muhammad Ali's second career. Ali showed that, he'd probably take a punch better than anybody in the history of the sport. And that even as a pedestrian fighter without his athletic gifts, he was still one of the best straight up fighters who ever lived, not just the genius dancer that he was as Cassius Clay. Roy hasn't been able to make that transition. It certainly hasn't been as kind to him. And I think he's just one of those people who's up on a ledge and nobody's going to talk him off it. There's some stuff in the article where, there's a lot of quotes he has to sort of contextualize where he's coming from that took me aback. And I don't feel great about what's to come, but I really wish him the best. I care about him a lot more than I ever did before meeting him, and then it got worse the more time I spent with him. He's a very likable guy. I completely understand why so many people were hesitant to give me access, because people really care about him who know him. He had a really good family, and talking to his wife, and I asked his wife, when you're married to somebody like this, she'd been married to him for 10, 11 years, you're married to somebody who's this gifted. Are the lows worth the highs in terms of his career? And she said, are you kidding me? Not even close. Not even close. To see somebody you love get hit the way he was against Lebedev, and everybody's treating it like a carnival atmosphere. All those Russians are, screaming and cheering and laughing. She's not laughing on the plane ride home to bring him back to his kids. And I don't know, it just gives you a different take on these guys. As I say, when I read Dan Raphael taking people apart, almost personally challenging their courage, like you get in the ring, you do it, like let me see what most of these boxing writers who tear these people apart for fighting in a cowardly way, how they would fight, because they would piss themselves in 10 seconds. They would be pissing and shitting themselves in the ring. And,
they do it before they got there, mate.
Yeah, they do it before they get there. And I don't know how much of a fighter I ever was as an amateur, but I did enough of it to understand the fear and the stress that these guys work under, and what they do is mind-boggling that they're able to just step in there, let alone do it with anywhere close to the proficiency that Roy Jones Jr. did, who is, yeah, at his peak. I think he is part of the conversation with Sugar Ray Robinson. I think he, even if you put him in with those great fighters of the 1980s, I mean, when he was a teenager, he sparred with Sugar Ray Leonard, and he told me, I said, how did you do against him? And he said, I was talking to him. Like, I mean, I was comfortable enough. I was talking to him, and I love that element to his style and his personality with what he did. Contrary to Floyd Mayweather, you always feel a little ripped off watching him. Like, I've never seen a fighter who's as good, I mean, as great as Mayweather, who's so content to be booed. I do think Roy was trying to excite. He was trying to do things you didn't think he could do. And I don't think Floyd ever did that. Full credit to what Floyd accomplished, dominating guys. But Roy was trying to do something very special. And that makes me, I don't know, a lot more invested in him and his career and his legacy.
In a way, you're right. I mean, the parallels to Floyd as well. Again, I think my biggest criticism of Floyd has always been that he is this just immensely talented fighter. Literally once in a generation sort of guy. And I wanted to see him tested more. I wanted to see him put in these extreme conditions where he would have to go to the full extent of his ability. Obviously, people nitpick at his resume and things, and I'm one of those sort of guys. But I wanted to see him really do his at his absolute best. And I was similar with Roy. I think just he did fight some dross at times, and it was very unfortunate. I really wanted to see him fight, just the absolute best of the best, until that unfortunate, Antonio Tarver knockout, when it was probably too late to see him at his absolute best. I think when we seen him do those knockouts with his hands behind his back and things like that, it's just absolutely insane. And I think I wanted to see it at a much higher level.
Oh, I agree with you. I do think at the same time, because I mean, even before I went out and I started researching it, that was my feeling too. Is I was like, oh, this guy's prime was kind of wasted fighting cab drivers and truck drivers. Like, who was really fighting? But then I thought, well, who didn't he fight? Who are these great people that he ducked in mid-career? He utterly dominated Bernard Hopkins. He blew away James Toney, who was a favorite in that fight. And I mean, that was something that,
with a damaged hand I hear as well.
Yeah, and I mean, he raised that. I said, let's compare you fighting the great fighters from the 80s, Duran, Leonard, Hearns, Hagler, and Floyd fighting them. Who does better? And I don't think anybody would say, like, you think Floyd is going to walk through those fighters? I don't know that he's going to survive Sugar Ray Leonard. I don't know that he'll survive Hearns, Duran. Whereas I think Roy would give all of those guys better fights. I think he'd be more dominant with all of them. It's just my view. And in terms of the two of them squaring off, I asked Roy, you're 154 fighting Floyd at his peak. And he's like, I already beat James Toney. And James Toney is Floyd with dog. Floyd is him without the dog, without that spirit. And I kicked the shit out of Toney. And, and I think there's an interesting point there that somebody I talked to, I forget who it was, and they deserve credit for this. I mean, if you guys think there's any merit in this appraisal, which is one sign of greatness is how great you look against great fighters. And I don't think Floyd has looked really great against great fighters. He's beaten them. He beat De La Hoya. He beat Pacquiao. Did he look great fighting them? I don't think so. People were booing. People were bored. Whereas Roy, go watch the James Toney fight. Watch Hopkins. Watch him fighting. Ruiz isn't the greatest fighter, but there's excitement. He's trying to make a statement. He is attempting to go further than you think he should in trying to dominate these guys. And I think he deserves a lot more credit for that. Once something like the Tarver fight, which Jim Lampley said was the most shocking thing he's ever seen calling fights. The Johnson knockout, then I think we say, oh, they were overrated, they were blown up. But I mean, the same thing happened with Tyson. The moment that Douglas knocked him out, oh, how good was he? And we start nitpicking. But I mean, the Tyson who fought Michael Spinks, I don't think any great heavyweight in history wanted to fight that guy. And that guy never got better. He went downhill from 21 years old.
Rapid.
Yeah, rapidly. And I think with Roy Jones Jr. at his best, come on. I mean, that guy gives anybody in the history of the sport a tremendous amount of problems. Whereas I don't think I see that with Floyd. I think Floyd in a different era, I don't think he would be the dominant fighter of the generation. I'm not saying he wouldn't be competitive, and I think he's an extraordinary fighter, but I don't think Floyd is the dominant guy from those people in the 1980s. And I think probably Roy could have been the dominant guy. The only fighter he said he was worried about was Hearns. And he said, I don't do well with guys with that kind of reach and that kind of height. But everybody else, he was enthused that, I wish I would have had an opportunity to fight them.
One fighter, I suppose, Bryn, you could, I wouldn't say ducked him, but one, I don't know if it was ever discussed or we spoke up with him, was Darius Michalczewski. Now, depending who you speak to, historians or whatever and stuff like that, many had Roy as a lineal champion. But then if you do break it down and look back, I think many people would say that Michalczewski was the true lineal champion until I think he lost against, maybe it was Zolt Erde, I think it was, it may have been. But it was probably the one fight, I suppose, where it actually ended any talk of Roy not being, I suppose you could say he was a top light heavyweight, but then it was removed all doubt, like Mayweather and Pacquiao, shall we say, you couldn't say that one person was the greatest welterweight at that time because he didn't fight him.
Well, no, I mean, that is always the name that gets brought up. And what I always just wonder is, who else? If he was spending all this time ducking other fighters, who's the next guy? Because you're right. I mean, he was a fighter. Roy had his issues after Seoul, Korea. I mean, such an egregious travesty what happened at the Olympics. They changed the entire scoring system. It left some scars on the guy who actually went home with that silver medal, which he never wanted to look at again. So he didn't want to travel. I mean, until he sort of had to toward the end of his career. He's doing a lot of traveling. I mean, he's getting a passport from
That's odd.
Putin. But prior to that, there was a lot more hesitancy for him to subject himself to international judging. The idea that Roy was ducking this guy, to me, it's preposterous. Did he look nervous getting in there against Tony, getting in there against Hopkins? I don't see it, So my sense is that Roy is pretty much as brave as they come in terms of the fights he wants. And I think his dad originally with his career was a little more careful in trying to shield him from moving too quickly. I think Roy, it's telling he still lives in Pensacola. This is a guy who earned tens of millions of dollars, and he lives in this small little naval town on the Gulf of Mexico. Like, he never wanted to live in the city. He never wanted to be part of that. He's a pretty low-key guy in most respects, but I think his passion in life is trying to assert that he's the best fighter who ever lived. And I think he's been reared that way since he was 5 years old. I think that was the central ambition. That was his father's central ambition for him. And I think in his own mind, he's still trying to fight for that legacy. So I don't see from him like any hesitance to fight the big fights. And other than the fighter you mentioned, I don't know who else he really ducked in the time. I know it took a while for him to have the rematch with Hopkins, which was annoying because I went to that rematch. That's the only fight I've ever seen of Roy's live. It was an absolutely horrible fight. Oh, terrible.
I stayed up till 4 o'clock in the morning to watch it and switched it off after 6 rounds. It was putrid. It
was the worst fight I've ever been to. And I raised that with him just to say, what was that? And he just, yeah, I know. But, I think one of the things he said that was interesting to me was that after Ruiz, he pushed really hard to get
Tyson. Tyson, yeah.
He wanted Tyson. And, look what James Toney did to Evander Holyfield. It's the only time Holyfield has ever given up in a fight. You look at him, his will is broken. James Toney just beat the shit out of him and broke his will. And James Toney did nothing against Roy Jones Jr. So it makes me kind of reevaluate how Jones might have done against those two guys. And Jones was very keen to talk about how he would have fought Holyfield, how he would have fought Tyson. He wanted that fight. And according to him, that was his swan song. He wanted to go out after that. Do I believe that he would have retired after that? No, because I'm sure there would have been some other thing to do. But it's a shame because that Roy was never much of a pay-per-view attraction. And obviously him fighting Tyson, I mean, that even in the 90s, that would have been $100 pay-per-view, a full, 15, 17 years before the Mayweather-Pacquiao fight. I mean, who wouldn't have wanted to tune in for that fight? It would have been extraordinary. I don't necessarily agree that I think Jones would have won that fight, but maybe he would have. I don't know.
Did they ever mention about the weight drop from Ruiz down to the Tarver fight? I think it was 20, 25 pounds or sort of muscle he had to lose coming down in weight in that fight. I mean, I think many people looked at that and then saying, right, okay, that's Roy way past his peak. 34 years old, coming down from heavyweight to light heavyweight. I suppose it was making history, I suppose, but it did seem like it caught him up in the end, and it looked like maybe that drain of the weight perhaps maybe just robbed him of maybe a couple of more years of his prime.
Oh, I completely agree with you, and yes, I brought it up with him, and yeah, he fully confessed that he was not the same guy. That weight loss drained him, changed him, changed the energy, changed just how he felt in the ring. With Glenn Johnson, he said he was completely dehydrated. Jones, I didn't really know this about him until we started talking about it, because you to have a few days with somebody, you can actually say things like, what was your diet like? Did you ever have in between fights where you'd go up in weight? How high did you go up in weight? What was your walk around weight? I didn't know that Jones walked around at 180 pounds back in those days when he was a middleweight.
Wow.
That surprised me, because that's not what we get with Floyd. Floyd is,
Allegedly,
but Floyd has never had any issues with weight, and having the opportunity to talk to Roy's wife, she said, Brin, I have to flat out confess, Roy is probably the most gifted athlete in the world with the worst diet ever during his prime. He would wait until 3 or 4 weeks before a fight, and then he'd cut out what he needed to cut out. But before then, breakfast is a bag of chips and soda, all this kind of thing. And I never really saw him that way. I thought he was far more kind of dialed in and calibrated with his career. I thought there'd be a nutritionist and a chef, and he's much more matter of fact. I mean, when I showed up, he's just like, we're going to go out and get some ribs. And we go to a corner store, and he's like, this must be the greatest corner store for selling ribs in the face of the earth, kind of thing. And I'm just like, well, I'm with a guy who is presently just around the corner from training for another fight. Like, whoa. Which isn't to say he wasn't disciplined with training, but just I think diet has always been a bit of a thing with him, and I didn't know that before.
Just on the fact that he's now got this Russian passport or citizenship. I mean, if it were you or I, we would need to go through hoops 3 months, maybe 6 months or whatever it is, maybe not even get it at all. Did they mention to you as to how it came about and how he managed to get that passport or citizenship from Vladimir Putin?
He said that Putin reached out to him, that he, had some fights that he was going over there for, and Putin reached out to him, and he felt honored to, that, such a president would want to meet with him, and he just mentioned about his desire to do more business over there, to train fighters as he's done, and to fight some more, and that he'd like some kind of conduit to make it easier, and their reply was about giving him citizenship. I don't think Roy is the most politically savvy person. I don't think he's that interested in it. So all the stuff with Crimea and Putin.
Yeah, been banned by Ukraine now, apparently. I mean, hopefully he doesn't take an advantage of for political purposes now as well.
Yeah, exactly. I just don't think that that's really. Roy is a very smart guy. I'm not trying to say that, but in terms of this area, I don't think this is very high on his list of priorities to really be educated in and up to date with what are the current situations. And I'm not saying that he shouldn't be. A lot of people were, I think, rightfully offended by the implications of it. And as you say, using an American fighter as some kind of political tool or whatever the agenda is. But that's not that. Roy doesn't have some kind of secret script, about what it all means. I think he just wants to be able to spend more time in Russia and have it be logistically an easier thing So that's what I took away from him about that whole situation.
I read a few things about this, about how Putin seems to be just sort of forming his own little collection of American stars, and just to boost his own standings and things. I mean, we saw Mickey Rourke fighting over there. I think when was that? A couple of months ago now, in the absolute farce. I think Steven Seagal was mates with him as well, and Gerald Depardieu, I think, was friends with him. It's all very bizarre and like very loved in with him, I think, and obviously he's using.
I thought yeah, no, I agree with you. And I thought when I showed up in Pensacola to meet with Roy at his house, for 3 days I wasn't able to get in touch with him, and I assumed that he was probably in Moscow, maybe meeting Putin again or something. I thought, oh my God, am I going to be here for 5 days without the guy I'm here to meet? Because I couldn't get through to him. So there's a lot of weirdness with all that stuff. I was glad that didn't have to be the whole focus of what I was writing about.
Here's something for you, Brin. Now he was in the corner working Dmitry Chudinov's corner in the UK a couple of weeks back. Now I watched one of Chudinov's fights late last year, and it was actually not long after what kicked off in Ukraine and Russia and stuff in a place called Sevastopol. It's in Crimea. Now they actually held an open air bike show, and I shit you not, this is true. It was held on a beach. You got the ring in the middle of the beach stuff, and round about it, I've actually still got the pictures of it. There is nothing but tanks, guns, motorbikes, the stuff. And I did a wee bit more digging into it, and I noticed the people who were actually running of it was a biker gang called the Night Wolves. Now they're also quite tight with Mr. Putin as well. He's seen to be going out on bike rides with him and stuff like that. And I think it's like, I forget the guy's name just now. I think it's Alexander Zalastanov or something like that. He's nicknamed the Surgeon, basically. And another name has come up as well, and not to the greatest of respects in the UK, Vladimir Hurinov. In the UK, Roy was meant to be fighting. Who was it again, Alex? Was it Tony Dodson again? Who was it?
Oh, I think it might have been like that, yeah. I can't remember his name. It wasn't a particularly known fighter, was it?
Yeah, it wasn't a known fighter, but anyway, I think Roy had basically signed on to take the fight, and for some reason, it was not long after Roy got the citizenship, he got pulled from the card for whatever reason. The promoter, Stephen Vaughan in the UK, then wanted, I think he made out so much money, so much outlay, and Hurinov basically says, sue me. So basically, the lad's out of pocket and that. So you just begin to wonder, you got Putin, you got this biker gang, you got Hurinov, who are all connected, and then you got Roy coming in here as well. So you just think to yourself, Roy, just watch what you're doing here, mate, you know?
Oh, I agree. He's a fighter. That's his focus, and the rest of it for him. I mean, I don't think he wants to walk into the remake of Rocky IV. With the backdrop you're suggesting, it sounds like some Street Fighter 2.
Oh, it was crazy, mate. Honestly, you want to see this? Dmitry Chudinov actually came to his ring walk on my daughter's life. Came to the ring in a tank, a motherfucking tank.
I mean, no, this is not really Roy's consciousness, so I don't know what the hell he makes of it going over there, or what he makes of Vladimir Putin. I think what he said to me was he was flattered that a high up politician would respect an American boxer, and that he likes that the Russians are very kind to him, and he has a lot of fans over there when he fights, and that he's just trying to continue on with his career and find fights, and Russia's been friendly to him. But beyond that, I didn't get a sense of that he's weighing in or considering any of the political implications, which, as I say, maybe he should be. Maybe the naivete isn't a reasonable excuse, but my sense is that he's not really thinking about it much. But maybe he is, and keeping it secret from some reporter who's spending 5 days with him. I don't know.
I actually got a question here for you, Bryn. It's from Marcus Bellinger. It's just going back to the Cuban reference. He's asking here, do you know a fighter called Robbie Ramirez? Will he go pro? And is there any difference to the younger era of Cuban fighters to the older era?
Well, there's less. Well, is he going to stay or go? I mean, if I knew that, it would probably be because I negotiated it or something, which I haven't. And no, I don't know. If we did know and that got out, that could seriously compromise his position over in Cuba to leave. Still, if he's somebody who says I want to leave, that could get him thrown off the team. There could be punishments from the government. So I have no idea. Still to this day, 99% of all the Cuban athletes, baseball players, boxers, have never left. A lot of them, I don't think it's because they all love the system, but a lot of them just can't bear the idea of leaving their families behind. And for all I know with this kid, maybe he thinks that with the embargo softening, that maybe he'll get an opportunity to turn professional and stay in Cuba. So it's become a lot more complicated, sort of considering what's going to happen next, because the changes are happening so fast. To your second question, I think there was more money earlier on in the Cuban system when it was subsidized by the Soviet Union to really nurture and develop fighters, find them, develop them, and look after them a lot better. And then that all stopped when the Soviet Union collapsed. So it's become a lot harder with less money, less resources to look after, discover, and nurture talent. So I don't think you're seeing the dominance with the Cuban teams the way there used to be. It's still just an incredible place for athletic talent, and they're as dedicated as they come. The instruction is second to none. But there have been some notable defections also of coaches as well as fighters. So the Cuban government is very aware of poaching that's going on. Gary Hyde was the first to go there and get one off that he signed, but there could be people there right now trying to do the same thing, maybe with Ramirez. I don't know.
Okay. Brin, I think we've kind of ran out of discussion unless you got anything else you want to add, maybe anything you want to ask us, but just to let the listeners know, where can they catch up with you, where can they read and see your work?
The latest is the Domino Diaries. You can get it wherever books are sold. Amazon seems to be a pretty handy resource for European boxing fans. The Roy Jones article will be coming out for Bleacher Report in the next month or so. And I guess some of the stuff we talked about in terms of the Mike Tyson, they can find on SB Nation, where I'm a contributing writer. So, yeah.
There you go. So I'd like to thank you, Brin. Hopefully the listeners enjoy that. We'll get that up on YouTube as soon as possible. So to the Box of Silence listeners, that's Brin-Jonathan Butler making his second appearance on the show. It's always good to have him on. Thanks a lot for that, Brin.
All my pleasure. Very fun.